Hi guys, that's an important video from Team Immigration Canada, and today we're going to talk about a faster and more efficient way for you to work here in Canada. That's the Canadian work permit. So let's get started. So that's the Canadian work permit, and if you want to work in Canada, you need two things. And out of the two, the first one is a valid open Canadian work permit. So once you see the work permit approval, this is the documents that you will get from the Canadian government. And that's how the work permit looks like. And again, if you look at the red highlighted part, I've done this on purpose to secure my client's privacy. So just ignore that part. And now let's move on to the second requirement in order for you to work in Canada. So the second requirement is that the employer that you're going to work for, he has to obtain a positive LMIA. And if you're not sure about what a positive LMIA is, then it stands for Labor Market Impact Assessment. So he has to get this document from the government, and he has to convince the government that he does not have any local Canadian workforce or labor required to do the job that's available at the moment. So this gap can only be filled by someone from abroad, like India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh. Now, the process of obtaining a positive LMIA, it's a very difficult task, and it can take a lot of time. And that's because the employer has to convince the Canadian government that we have to bring someone from overseas and get them to work here in Canada. That's why it can take a lot of time. So I'm going to introduce you to a new program that's going to get rid of the second requirement of obtaining a positive LMIA, and it's just going to focus on getting your valid Canadian work permit. Now, before we move on, if you haven't done so, please do subscribe our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon. I'm going to count till 5. Here we go. This new program is called the International Mobility Program. In other words, it's called the Open Work Permit. And the best thing about this program is that it does not require a positive LMIA, and that is just amazing. Now, before I take you to the step-by-step process to get your open work permit through International Mobility Program, let me first explain that there are total 3 types of open work permits. So the first type of open work permit, that's called unrestricted work permit. It allows you to change employers, occupation, and location of the work. So for example, if I get a job under this open work permit in Sault Ste. Marie for some employer, which is in upper part of Canada, and I decide to move to Toronto and change my employer at the same time. So under this unrestricted open work permit, it's absolutely fine for me to change the city and also change the employer at the same time. So this is what it means to work under unrestricted open work permit. So the second type of open work permit is called restricted work permit. It allows you to change employer, but it does not allow you to change your occupation. So for example, you got a job in Sault Ste. Marie as a computer programmer, and you decide to move to Toronto. That's totally fine. You can move to Toronto, but under this restricted work permit, you're allowed to change the city, but you're not allowed to change your occupation. So when you move to Toronto, you still have to work as a computer programmer, just like you worked in Sault Ste. Marie. So that's the third type of open work permit. It's also called the restricted work permit. It allows you to change the employer, which means that you're allowed to change the company you work for, but it does not allow you to change the location of the work. That means location means the actual city where you work. So if we take a look at this picture, you get a job in Sault Ste. Marie for some company, and you decide to move to Toronto. So under this work permit, you're not allowed to move to Toronto. However, you can change the employer in Sault Ste. Marie. You can change the company in Sault Ste. Marie, but you cannot move to Toronto. Now let's talk about the requirements for obtaining the open work permit. So here we go. So yeah, here we move into the requirements of obtaining the open work permit. Now this is the biggest question: who can apply for the open work permit, and whether are you eligible for open work permit or not. If you're one of the following 7 categories of applicants, then it means you are eligible to apply for the open work permit. And the first category is if you are an international student graduated from a Canadian Educational Institute, and you're also eligible for a PGWP, a postgraduate work permit, then you can apply for an open work permit. So let's move to number 2. You can apply for an open work permit if you're a spouse or common law partner. That means either your husband or wife is an international student or a skilled worker in Canada. That allows you to apply for an open work permit. So let's move to number 3. You can apply for an open work permit if you're a person who is a refugee, or you are a protected person, or you are a refugee claimant, or a family member. So let's move to number 4. You can apply for open work permit if you are a temporary resident permit holder in Canada, then you can apply for an open work permit. So let's move to number 5. You can apply for an open work permit if you are a person who has applied for permanent residence in Canada. Okay, if you have applied for a permanent residence in Canada. So let's move to number 6. You can apply for open work permits if there's a family member of a person who's applied for permanent residence in Canada. So that means if your husband has applied for permanent residence in Canada, then you as a wife are allowed to apply for the Canadian open work permit. So let's move to number 7. You can apply for an open work permit if you are a young worker in special programs. So finally, we're going to talk about the step-by-step process to obtain your Canadian work permit. So the first step to get the open work permit, you have to get a valid Canadian job offer. So that means you have to get an offer from one of an employer in Canada. That's the first requirement for you to get the open work permit. Now the next question is, how are you going to get a job offer? For that, I will do another video which will explain the entire process from A to Z on how to actually get a job offer from employers in Canada. So for now, we're gonna move on to the second step. So the second step is to apply for the visa and the work permit. Once you get the job offer from one of our Canadian employers, that's when you apply for the visa and the work permit. That's our second step. So this is the official Canadian government's website. Here you can find out on how to apply for the open work permit. You simply have to scroll down all the way and select one of these 2 options where it says, where are you applying from? And then you click the drop-down menu and you choose one of the 2, either outside Canada or from inside Canada, depending on what your situation is. So step number 3 comes as soon as you've applied for the open work permit. It's simply a wait for processing. Normally it takes 3 to 27 weeks, depending on your country of citizenship, and you simply have to wait and see within this time window given, Canadian government will give you with their final decision, and that's when you move on to step number 4. So step number 4, that's the most exciting part of this entire process, that you actually get to travel to Canada. So guys, once you're given the open work permit from the Canadian consulate in your home country, you have to make quick arrangements for your travel and accommodation. And once you arrive at the Canadian airport, you will be questioned by the immigration officer at the port of entry, and he will ask you a few questions about your work permit, about your duration of your stay in Canada. Make sure that you answer all the questions correctly. Otherwise, he has the authority to deny you entry. So make sure all your answers are correct. And this is it. Welcome to Canada on your open work permit. So guys, our next video, that's going to be about how we can get a job offer from Canadian employers. And let me tell you, Canadian employers, they're scattered all over Canada. There's so many open positions like electricians, plumbers, butchers, farmers, and there are many more positions. So I'm going to explain the entire process on how to get a job offer from A to Z. So for that, you have to make sure that you subscribe to our channel and you hit that bell icon. Otherwise, you're gonna miss out on the next video and you'll miss out on big advantages. For now, I have to go. Stay home, stay safe, take care, bye-bye.